Thank you for joining today's office hours session. Um, we may have a bit of a smaller group today, which is totally fine. We're going to
Mhm.
keep things a bit more informal, I would say. There isn't a necessarily solidified topic for this office hours. It's more a chance to engage with our membership in a Q&A format. I do have some updates to share on my end that may generate some conversation. And we have Deana Dennis here as well, our Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs, that has some information she could share on some really exciting progress that's being made on the legislative side. So, looking forward to an opportunity to get into those details a bit. But I will mention, and many of you may be familiar with this already, but we have a bylaws amendment that was endorsed by the Member Outreach and Engagement Committee and subsequently endorsed by the Executive Committee that would increase the amount of alternate members up to two, not a requirement, but as an opportunity for each of our communities to be able to get more people engaged with CPCNH, and that may lead to more folks participating on our committees, which would be excellent. So that's something that will be brought to the annual membership meeting on April 30th. And if that's not on your calendars yet, please mark your calendars. We will send out a formal save the date soon, but it's going to be held in Concord at the Croponi Center. So looking forward to that, which will be here before we know it. Couple other items on my list to mention. We have recently been able to utilize SMS alerts and rolled that out thanks to the work of Nick Gosling as part of the newsletter campaign for folks that have indicated they are willing to receive text notifications from us. And that was successful. So we're going to use it sort of sparingly for more critical communications, but I've seen some good success with our action alerts for our legislative advocacy signups. So that's been really great and is something that I think will be helpful when it comes time to, say, announce rates next period around. And I'd encourage folks to make community members, energy committee members, et cetera, aware of that capability. Um, Another thing I wanted to highlight was we're pretty early on in this process, but I'm excited that we're making some movement on hosting some coordinating meetings from an operational standpoint with the utilities. We have all three IOUs that have agreed to a joint meeting with CPCNH and Calpine coming up in April. And this is really a chance for us to talk about any issues that may exist with sharing of data to, better have mutual understanding about how we can work more efficiently with one another, barriers and obstacles we've identified and they've identified. And it's really just an opportunity for us, I think, to work more effectively with the utilities to better serve our mutual customers. So again, we're pretty early on in that, but I was taking the lead on coordinating that effort and was really happy to get all three IOUs agreeing that they'll participate, and NHEC is sort of tentatively accepted joining that conversation as well. So that's where that's at for now, and I'm sure there will be more updates to share after that initial meeting, and then hopefully as we continue to meet, maybe on a quarterly basis in the future.
When did you say that was?
So that's going to be held in April. It's the afternoon of April 16th, if I'm remembering correctly.
I don't know if that's the right forum for the question, but I had talked to Henry briefly at one point about seeing if we can get any kind of movement with the utilities for um, upgrading their software systems. Because a lot of our issues they've always been pleading oh, our software system is so old, we can't change
Right.
it, and blah, blah. And, you know, while I'm sure there's validity to that, it's also just an excuse. And I was wondering if there's any way we can kind of bring up that topic and have us support, the they get money back, or they, when they invest in infrastructure, right, that gets put into their rate base.
Right.
But I don't know if investing in software systems is treated the same way. And I was wondering if there's any way that we could, somehow partner with them and say, look, we would support some kind of petition to the PUC to, carve out some of your, your request for infrastructure budget, and move it to something that's identified as software, investment with, a couple of deliverables that are tagged to it or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about it?
I think that's a really interesting idea, and clearly, as you stated, we know that there has been pretty great resistance to updating legacy systems that would allow for the types of data sharing that we really need to do more advanced, projects with our customer base. I think that this forum could provide us the type of information that would maybe lead to those discussions, Steve. We're trying to be careful not to characterize these meetings as being sort of regulatory or legislative focus as much as sort of developing mutual understanding and trying to work together on things operationally. But these are the types of conversations that would build the foundation to be able to do something that you've described.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think, yeah, I think the building the relationship, I think, is a good goal. And I think by acknowledging that, we understand. I mean, I, I I worked for AT&T for 40 years. I mean, you talk about legacy systems, they got
sure.
them in spades, right? So I understand this is an issue. I mean, these things are probably coded in COBOL. Nobody even knows COBOL anymore, and whatever. So, it is an issue. It doesn't go away easily, but it definitely doesn't go away unless somebody takes some action on it. And if we were to strike some kind of conversation where we say, we understand the difficulty of this problem, but just saying it's difficult doesn't mean we
Sure.
should never do anything. And I don't know, some kind of partnership. If there's some way we could make it sound more like a partnership than a adversarial thing.
Yeah,
Sounds
absolutely.
like that's what you want to do, right?
Yep, absolutely. I see Cliff has a hand up.
Yeah, just for a little additional context, late last summer, we did reach out to engage the utilities with Representative Michael Vose on some potential legislation that we provided to him. That because what he said, back from last spring, in terms of all the bills that they put on the table after the committee voted them ITL, not, to not legislate them. He basically said, if there's a way to encourage the utilities to do some of the things you're looking for on a voluntary basis, maybe there's some legislation we could, do on that. So we drafted some legislation, and he convened a meeting with representatives from Unitil and Eversource. Liberty, for various reasons, has sort of decreased their engagement. And some of that was not exactly, but similar to what you were suggesting, Steve, which is to allow for some voluntary collaboration, but to sort of open the pathway for cost recovery if they did things like invest in improved load settlement. Of course, data sharing, we were partially addressing through the data platform, but then, legislation came in to repeal that, which last year, which passed the House. at the beginning of January and is now also passed the Senate. So that's not happening. But we did intervene in Unitil's distribution rate case where they are uh, uh, in the midst of deploying a more, state-of-the-art AMI system. And of course, as part of their testimony, they touted all the great things that the AMI could do with making interval data available. So my testimony in that docket sort of focused on, said, great, we support their major AMI upgrade. It can do some really cool things with that. But what we don't see is a plan for how we're going to realize that value, starting with being able to share interval data and time of use data with competitive suppliers, which, include community power aggregations in that phrase, as well as, changing, load settlement to actually use the interval data for load settlement, including negative data, usage data, and so on and so forth. So just to make a long story short, we're near concluding settlement discussions, and on Tuesday, Unitil should be filing the settlement agreement, and hopefully there'll be some good news there in terms of progress with them. Eversource and Liberty are still two different cases. With Eversource, some good news came out publicly yesterday in an investigation docket in which the commission was investigating a proposal from a large customer consortium, was sort of the intervener, that had proposed to pilot for the largest industrial C&I customers of Eversource that have interval metering, to pilot an option to pass through transmission costs based on the individual customer's share of coincident peak demand, which is a pilot that we supported with Liberty Utilities, and which is a rate option in both Maine and Massachusetts, and where they use interval data for load settlement for these customers. And Eversource did say, for the first time, it was news to everyone, including the commission, they've had all these problems with this legacy large power billing system, which is, Jessica herself said, it's older than I am. It's like a 50-year-old software that's in COBOL, I believe. And they basically are saying it's really fragile, and they now are on the verge of implementing a plan, a solution is what she called it, a solution that would replace the large power billing system, is the best I could gather. She didn't say a whole lot about it, but she was talking an 18-month time frame in which they had a solution to all their problems with the large power billing system. So that's a tiny bit of incremental progress that we're working on. And I was just talking with Deana before the start of this, that they had offered, or she had lunch with Jessica Chiavaro, is one of their lead general counsel attorneys who represents them in a lot of the cases we've been involved with. And at that point, Jessica indicated a willingness to convene their meter team to hear our ideas about how they could incrementally start making interval metering available that would enable some of these other possibilities. And at that time, earlier this year, there's a willingness to try to facilitate that more informal, hopefully collaborative discussion. And so Dean is going to follow up with that with Eversource to see at least if we can't get more of a dialogue going. I do know with what Jackson was talking about, Calpine in particular wanted it to focus on operational issues where there is more of a collaborative spirit rather than and try to avoid getting into the major policy disputes. So it may be that somehow gently it could be raised in that form, but it might be better, in sort of parallel efforts to engage on these bigger policy questions. But certainly we, in our thinking, meaning the RLAC committee in particular, we're trying to lay the groundwork for some possible legislation that all addresses this next year in anticipation of a possibility of a somewhat more friendly legislative environment. Although, even with the difficulties we've had over the past few years, we have had four significant legislative victories this year, and they all are because we've been able to help build a bipartisan agreement. And the
Yep.
one thing that came out of that effort in September was that Eversource and Unitil did say they would support our legislative initiative to enable storage in conjunction with net metering. Not that that really works for us, not being able to serve net metered customers, but it's important policy progress. And we did end up getting a pretty favorable language in a unanimous bipartisan collaboration between the ranking members of the Republicans and the Democrats on ST&E. So, we're making some progress, although it's very frustrating how slow it is.
But progress nonetheless, Cliff, and I
Yes,
really
for
appreciate
sure.
you chiming in with that added context and, look forward to seeing everything that you will all be able to accomplish on the RLA side. And I think that's a great segue into Deana providing some timely updates specifically about the movement on HB 1733 and that amendment that's come out of ST&E unanimously OTPA. So, Deana, I don't know if you are able to share a little bit more about that at this point.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Deana Dennis, Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs for the Coalition. And thank you, Cliff, for teeing everything up really nicely. We do have some, I would say, four great early session victories that I'd love to just highlight briefly and also go into a little bit more deep dive into our most recent victory, which is this House Bill 1733, a bill that would really do a lot of reform to utility default service. So I'm happy to start there and then make our way through the line. Some of the stuff may be a bit review because if you've been paying attention to our action alerts and legislative updates, you've probably seen a lot of this. But we can start with House Bill 1733. And you may recall that last year, CPCNH had requested a bill that was sponsored by Representative Tom Corman of Lebanon that would clarify in statute that utilities cannot shift or subsidize their supply costs by other customers, such as customers of community power or customers that are served by competitive suppliers. That bill ended up getting laid on the table in the House, which was in a way a good thing because it meant that it could come back, the policy substance could come back this next session. And we were able to secure sponsorship again to bring it back. And we were also able to continue to get other major suppliers in the state like Constellation and Calpine and Freedom Energy Logistics to be more engaged in this. So there are actually two bills proposed for this year, one sponsored by Democrats, one sponsored by a more senior Republican on the committee, that's Representative Mike Harrington in Stratford County. And the bills essentially would do the same thing, which is just clarify that, this cost shifting thing, can't be done as part of, default service reconciliation. And what happened was those bills were heard earlier this month, or one of them was heard late January. The other one was heard last week in committee. Cliff provided some really detailed and important testimony, which kind of caught the committee up in terms of what had happened with the two utility proposals last year. You may remember the Eversource $6.5 million and the Unitil, I think it was like just under $1 million that they were seeking to recover through their stranded cost charge, which is a non-bypassable distribution charge. And CPCNH and Cliff's work in particular that helped to uncover the true source of those significant undercollections, which wasn't, as the utility suggested, due to customer migration and customer migration to community power program launches. in particular, but really because of errors in their internal systems on the billing and load settlement side, and even human errors. So our testimony and discovery really brought those to light. We also had testimony that was seeking to analyze this new procurement scheme that the commission has imposed upon all of the utilities. So right now, all three of the investor-owned utilities, so Liberty, Unitil, Eversource, they must procure 50% of their residential and small customer load from the spot market. And then the remaining 50% is done through a fixed all requirements contract, load following contract. And our analysis in those dockets indicated that, the current way of doing this, pricing methodology with the spot market would more times than not lead to significant under recoveries. So balances that the utility would incur because the rates were underpricing the true costs. So between all of that testimony and that of other suppliers and other entities that came in to weigh in on this issue, I think we were able to strongly impress upon the committee, the House Science, Tech, and Energy Committee, that this issue is still live. It's still a live issue at the commission. There's still a need for this. And then at the hearing, the Constellation representative offered a proposed amendment that would go a step further and actually prohibit the utilities from doing the spot market procurement. So it would take them out of the spot market procurements and put them back into the fixed contract, all requirements, or fixed price, all requirements contract for the small, for the residential and the small residential customers. And at the hearing, the committee was a lot of members on both sides of the aisle. They seemed really interested in that approach. And so late last week and over the weekend, we were working with folks at Freedom Energy and Constellation and Calpine, and with the various bill sponsors and committee leaders to, offer some proposed options for the committee to move forward. And then this Tuesday at the executive session where they mark up and then they, vote to recommend bills out of the committee one way or another, they ended up taking the more progressive, inclusive language. So now this bill, and I don't know if I can, maybe somebody else can pull it up on the screen. The amendment is a replace all, but essentially does four things. One, it prevents the cost shifting. Two, it takes the utilities out of the spot market procurement for both the residential and small commercial customers. Three, it provides that any imbalance, so if there's an under collection or an over collection in utility default service, it must be reconciled within two default service periods, two consecutive default service rate cycles. So basically 1 year. And then a fourth piece of this is a little bit nuanced, but it actually is important. It provides a bit of an off-ramp. So in the event that, let's say, Liberty Utilities, for instance, they are serving a very shrinking default load, with most of the territories they serve having launched community power. Salem was one of their bigger remaining loads, and they launched in the fall, and there's two more in the southern New Hampshire. Windham and Pelham, I believe, are launching this spring. So they will be left with a very small percentage of default load. And so there is some really fair risks that they may not get any bids from suppliers for a fixed all requirements contract. So there's a bit of a, I don't want to say a loophole, but an off-ramp, so that if a utility does not receive any bids, or the commission does not approve a bid as being the most, cost effective and just and reasonable, that the utility can procure through the spot market to serve the load. But this bill is a really good thing. It received a unanimous and bipartisan support recommendation of ought to pass with this amendment out of the committee. And we're expecting it to go to the House floor probably the Thursday after next. So that would be March 5th. And then from there, it would go over to the Senate. So anyway, I'll stop there. I don't know if Cliff might have some other insights to share, but I'm happy to take any questions about this bill, and then we can chat about some of the other bills as well.
Well, besides the fact that it got a unanimous vote, they also put it on the consent calendar. So that's really good.
Yeah, when I saw the news, it made my day. That's all I have to say about that. But I see Joe Lamatina has a hand.
Yeah, it's somewhat related and maybe not. This may be premature, but I saw in the news yesterday that Eversource reported record profits of 1 point something billion. A couple of questions. One, do you think that makes it difficult? To me, it makes it difficult for them to say that they need to raise rates. How's that going to impact, compared to our rates? If anybody has an idea about that.
Well, that's that profit does not come from their default service supply. Um, and it actually also partially reflects the fact that their rates, Eversource's rates did increase for their default service. I mean, for their distribution service charges this past earlier this last year. So some of that increased distribution revenues, some of the profit margin from that is already showing up in the overall corporate profits. I mean, what this bill that Deana just discussed, although it would not be fully applicable until the rate period starting in February of next year, it sends a pretty strong signal, and there is a distinct possibility that Eversource is going to have significant undercollections from this winter that may cause them to have to significantly raise rates. There's still a disputed amount from prior period under recovery that has not gone into rates yet. That's on appeal in part to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. So it's still speculative, but there is a distinct possibility that they're going to have significant undercollections to put into their rates starting August 1, which may help us be more competitive. And if this bill becomes law, both the commission and DOE and the utility will all have a signal that the legislature, at least for the residential small business group, wants them to go back to all requirements, load following service, to minimize the risk of market volatility to those small customers.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that added explanation, Cliff. That's really helpful. I do see a couple other hands up. Go ahead, Ken.
You're
I think
muted.
you're muted, Ken.
You're still muted, Ken.
Apologies. From what Cliff just said, I think he confirmed my question was that the utility acquisition process for the small customers will go back to the way it was several years ago of all requirements purchases.
Probably. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a given, but this bill is certainly sending them in that direction. And if the bill became law, it would require that effectively starting February 1 of next year for that rate period. As you know, with it going over to the Senate, it's possible that it wouldn't get to the governor's desk until June, when they may already be in the process setting rates for August 1. But that June case will still be considering but the prior period under collection, assuming that issue's resolved, as well as I'm confusing. There's two different issues that are kind of on appeal right now, and one of which is from the consumer advocate's point of view, their return on equity in their distribution rate case, but that's already in their rates.
Thank you.
And then I see a hand up from Dave Hemingway. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and say a little bit more about that same bit. Um, Regarding the record profits, for example, those obviously are not the supply side, which is the rates that we deal with. Um, but that has been a continual topic. Uh, a little bit here, though it's not something that we can do a whole lot about, other than testimony in a PUC hearing. But the consumer advocate has been on top of that, and also one of the reasons for the change of guard, so to speak, at the PUC and the appointments by the governor. She very much disapproved with the approval of the hike in rates that will continue to hike rates for the next several years, for the meter fees and the distribution fees. And so that was one of the things that she stated as to why she did not reappoint the existing PUC folks. So I think there's nothing that we can do specifically on regards to the meter fee and the distribution side, but certainly them announcing record profits in the portions where the governor and the PUC and the consumer advocate are all saying, that's actually too much, lends some good credence to possibly seeing that get reduced at a future PUC hearing.
Yeah, I mean, they have been in the news a lot for various reasons lately, and it'll be interesting to track how I think things go with the governor's comments at the State of the State address and other things we're hearing from the OCA. One other comment I'd make on the supply side is I did attend a webinar yesterday titled Eversource Supply Weights Webinar for Municipal Officials, and asked a couple questions about if they had concerns over the move to the 50% direct, market participation, and also about daisy charges. And Mike Licata did address those questions, and the way that he framed it, he stated that Eversource was initially concerned to some degree about the move and the trade-offs between potentially getting a lower rate for customers on the supply side, but also the risk that would be, excuse me, shifted to them due to market volatility. And just sort of his characterization of it made it seem like they did, in fact, have concerns about the current methodology. Just add that for context in what we're seeing through this bill and otherwise. Steve, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, just to mention that, the record profits thing, I think that's a good grist for the mill for why CPCNH is in the best interest of our communities, when you understanding that we don't have a direct influence necessarily on the PUC, but by holding up the example of these rate increases that Eversource got, and on top of record profits, is, we are your voice in the power markets, and that's one of the tacks I'm trying to take with our local community, to offset the price competitiveness issue. So this is our added value here. Don't forget about that when you see the big bills coming from Eversource. We're trying to fight for you.
Just in that regard, as a result of our efforts, there was a chunk, I forget the dollar figure, was Deana, like about $3 million, that they were gonna try to recover from small customer group.
For a little
Yeah,
over.
I think you're right. It was more like $4 million. That the commission simply denied, because they determined that it was it was just too old, and it was clearly a result of Eversource's internal errors.
Yeah, and Cliff, I think you're recalling, so their original proposal was a 6.5 million.
Oh yeah,
And then when the commission in the Unitil case and then the Eversource case said, yeah, we're not going to consider this as a non-bypassable distribution charge recovery, give us a new proposal as part of the default service docket. They came back and said, oh, we only are asking for 4 million, a little over 4 million, because the other 2.5-ish million would have been attributable to competitive suppliers and community power, and they were out of time from, the ISO New England gives you a year for resettlement, and they were out of that time. So they didn't have a means through regulation to recover that. They still haven't said, how they may seek to recover that from the suppliers, but that's kind of besides the point. So then we're looking at that 4 million, and then what the commission ended up approving for recovery was only a fraction, I think 1.43 million of that.
Right. It was 1.4 million of that 4 million, roughly 4 million. So that there was 2.5 million that otherwise, I mean, we actually didn't take a position on it one way or the other. But the consumer advocate did and said you should just deny. They argued for denying the whole 4 million. DOE argued for denying 2 million of that, or 2.1, and the commission kind of went with the DOE down the middle. But that's a couple $1 million that they won't collect from their default service customers, which ultimately is attributable to our efforts from last spring to reveal the fact that it was internal errors that caused the under collection, not customer migration. So, I mean, that's value added for the community, Steve, but it's not per se value that we provided directly to our customers, ironically, but it's still savings that ratepayers would not have experienced but for the coalition's efforts.
Yep. And then the other things that we did advocate for in all three of the dockets were to tighten up the reconciliation period so they happen more frequently every 6 months. So every rate period, as the commission is still requiring them to, procure 50% from the spot market for the residential and small commercial. So that was sort of the approach we took, is it's much more volatile. Our analysis says more times than not, the utilities are going to undercollect. So if you're going to continue this scheme, then it would be best to reconcile every 6 months instead of every 12 months. And ideally recoup those costs over a 6-month period than over a 12 or 18 or 24 plus month, so that customers on default service are feeling the true costs of default service, and there's no price distortion, or any price distortion is minimized.
And Deana, working with our regulatory counsel, Amy Manzelli, the two of them attended Unitil's and Liberty's December default service hearings, and they got witnesses from Liberty and Unitil to concede on the witness stand and sworn testimony that they believe that the commission's methodology for what they call the proxy price, what they were trying to estimate it would cost buying in the spot market, was more likely than not to underestimate the value, so that it was more likely than not that there would be under collections that would have to go into rates in the future. And so that was progress, because we'd made the same argument last spring that part of the problem here is the commission telling them how to set the proxy price. And if they were left to their own means, they would come up with a higher price to avoid under collections. But Deana, you were going to talk about a couple of other bills, legislative victories real quickly here.
Yeah. I wanted to highlight some of our other early session victories. That includes House Bill 1002. And thank you everybody who reached out to their representatives and asked them to vote against this. The bill actually was laid on the table. The motion was initiated by Republican Representative Joe Guthrie, who's a member of the House Municipal and County Governments Committee. And there were 20.
That's the bill that would have repealed the local option for a solar tax credit.
Yeah.
I mean, to not tax solar installations.
And there were 29 Republicans, including Majority Leader Jason Osborne, who voted with all the Democrats to table the bill. So that is a huge victory. I know that the BIA mobilized their members sort of at the last minute. So I think they had a huge help in pushing that. And again, thank you to all of you who, reached out to your reps and encouraged them to not support this bill. And just a reminder, over 2/3 of New Hampshire communities and about the same, about 2/3 of CPCNH member communities have voted elect this option. So clearly it's something that communities value. They want to have the authority to determine how they treat local solar installations. So this is great. What does it mean by having it laid on the table? Well, it means that it's essentially set aside for now. The House can bring the bill back at any time. I believe it's just a simple majority vote to bring it off the table. But then obviously you would need the votes to, the recommendation was ought to pass. So they would need to have flipped around those 29, probably a little less, but they would need to flip a significant number of votes to get an ought to pass vote approved. So something that we'll continue to monitor. And I think it's good for folks to continue to reach out to their reps and thank them, especially if your rep is one of the 29 Republicans that voted in favor of tabling the bill. Great to show them some love, reach out, show your appreciation, talk about the benefits, especially the economic benefits that this policy brings. I know Cliff mentioned House Bill 1718. That's the bill that we had worked with Representative Vose and some of the utilities and other stakeholders after last session in hopes of bringing back something from our New Hampshire Energy Forward that could gain muster and support by the masses, or as many as possible. And this bill received unanimous support from the committee last week. We were able to work with the sponsors on both sides of the aisle to get a good common sense amendment and working with other stakeholders to get their buy-in and support. And that bill came out with unanimous recommendation ought to pass. And then yesterday it passed the House via, I think it was unanimous voice vote. There could have been one or two in the peanut gallery voting nay, but I only heard yays. It was a very solid voice vote of support. So next, that bill will go to House Finance, more or less for a rubber stamp to move forward. I think then it will go back to the House and then back to the Senate. There is one small concern that we'll be working on to get clarity, which is the PUC's fiscal impact analysis to the bill's fiscal note. I don't know if we want to go into a lot of detail there, but that's something that Cliff and I and our folks at Main Street Strategic will be working on over the coming weeks. Any questions about that bill? Yay.
Yeah, not seeing any at this point, but yeah, there's some really exciting updates coming out of this session.
Could you just summarize again briefly what that's about?
So House Bill 1718 clarifies that energy storage can be part of net metering.
Okay, the storage. Got it.
And it does some housekeeping things around PUC and DOE authority, including that the DOE has the rulemaking authority and not the PUC. And of course, the DOE has already been working on this in their interconnection rules that will apply to distributed energy resources and storage. So this is just kind of like updating in statute what is already taking place.
Okay, thank you.
And I put some of the key points in the chat there as well that you can
Oh,
review.
great.
That was
Thanks.
from the action alert.
Yep.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Ken?
Yeah, just really out of curiosity, for HB 1002, did the New Hampshire Municipal Association weigh in?
I believe they also opposed that. Yes.
So they were supportive of our position.
They're supportive of our position.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
They opposed the bill. I'm sure they supported the motion to table.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you.
And then, oh, Steve, I still see your hand up. Do you have another
Oh, sorry. No,
legacy?
sorry.
No worries.
If I might, on the storage bill, I just want to share my screen briefly. It's a little more obscure, but a really valuable thing that the bill does. There's a chapter called Customer Energy Storage, which, thanks to Senator Waters, it got enacted about 5 or 6 years ago.
Cliff, sorry to interrupt. Could you make the screen? Could you zoom in so we can?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Great.
So this chapter will the italics shows what's changed, and as noted, the department's already developed rules for all interconnections of distributed energy resources, and they're actually very, very progressive. They treat battery storage really well, with the sort of state-of-the-art recommendations from the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. But what it also clarifies is that the commission can approve tariffs and issue orders in adjudicated proceedings consistent with the rules and pertain use of to use of and utility compensation for such energy storage systems. And that wasn't clear under the current law totally. But here's the really important part. It says the department and commission shall incorporate the following principles into rules and orders, respectively, because department will do rules and the commission orders. And this is what Senator Waters got into place like five or 6 years ago, which is pretty progressive, basically saying we want, but it really hadn't been implemented because of some of the confusion in the statute. But the notion that consumers of electricity have a right to install, interconnect, use energy storage systems. And then from our point of view, what becomes really important here is besides, streamline interconnection and so forth, commission ability to approve mechanisms for utilities to compensate a non-utility for just and reasonable cost of any transmission or distribution charges actually avoided because of the storage project. And for transmission charges in particular, this can be a huge part of the value for storage by reducing transmission cost. And it's easy, it's technically, it's practicable to do that. It's feasible to do that. And they also, point out that rules or orders should allow for bring your own device, not just utility controlled programs, which has sort of been the case. The utilities have kind of wanted to control battery storage on the distribution grid. And again, approving mechanisms to compensate, even bring your own battery behind the meter storage for value that they produce, including these avoided transmission costs, which is what we've been trying to kind of get in a lot of ways, because it's such a big part of the value, including particularly for large PV coupled with storage. And there's clarification that this was just sort of redundant because the rest of the bill does this. It makes it clear that the commission has authority to allow storage as part of net metering, which Eversource in particular had been questioning. They said, we don't think the commission has this authority. The commission was interested in exploring it, but this now will make it clear that they do have that authority. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Cliff, for that deep dive of the language there. That is definitely helpful to see. for the audience. I do see a couple other hands up, and I'll do a quick time check. We are at 1:51, so about 9 minutes left in the office hours. Go ahead, Bruce Tucker.
Yes, I have a question about 1718. Will that impact the Connected Solutions program to expand demand response?
I
It
don't.
doesn't adversely affect it. It doesn't
Yeah.
disturb it. What the language I was just showing points the commission in the direction of saying this shouldn't just be a utility program, that people can do this on their own, bring your own device, and that they can, prove mechanisms to compensate them in a lot of the same ways that utilities are claiming that these have value in reducing coincident peak demand. But this, language says now you should be doing that in conjunction with net metering, and even standalone batteries should get credit for avoided transmission costs, or at least that's clearly enabled now. So
Go ahead, Dave.
So with storage compensation here set to cover all the avoided costs, of course that needs accurate metering. Unitil has continued to roll out more of their interval meters, which I know Eversource has been fighting. So at what point in time do we expect load settlement to actually use the newly available better interval load data? Even if that's, for example, just normal load settlement with Unitil and our customers.
I'm not jumping into an answer because I can't at this point reveal what's in the settlement agreement. But on Tuesday, by the end of the day, Tuesday, that should be filed in public, which would indicate what Unitil's intentions are, hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, some more news to come.
Which hopefully will set a bit of a precedent for Eversource to point to the fact that changing load settlement is possible.
All right, maybe I can just quickly recap our first victory of the session, which is Senate Bill 590. This is a bill that would specify that communities can use a revolving fund to support electric aggregation programs. This was something that came about over last summer with interest from Bruce Tucker and other members that have been participating in the discretionary reserves adder program in hopes that they can use these funds to support efficiency and other energy innovation programs as part of the aggregation. So this bill, it's sponsored by Senator Donovan Fenton, who represents Bruce Tucker's district, including Peterborough. It does have bipartisan support on it. I think Senator Avard and I think Senator Lang or Pearl also signed on to it. It was one of the early bills that the Senate Energy Committee heard. And actually the same day that they heard it, they execed it. They adopted the proposed amendment that we worked with Senator Fenton on that just includes an additional clarification that, these funds would not be using taxes. And they unanimously recommended it ought to pass with the amendment. It then went on to the Senate floor in late January, and then was also passed unanimously on the Senate consent calendar. So this bill, it does have an FN. I think it's going to finance, but I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it on the finance committee yet. But then it should cross over to the House. So this is really good. And we had some strong targeted member engagement, including from Director Tucker at the hearing in advance. We'd also done some outreach engagement with NHMA on this, as well as some other groups. There was no opposition to it at the hearing. So I think it paves a good precedent for once it crosses over to the House. Bruce, Cliff, I don't know if you have any other comments you want to share.
Well, Bruce did testify, and I think that helped quite a bit on that bill.
Agreed. Oh, Bruce, you're on mute.
Yeah, I just promised Donovan that I would show up if he agreed to sponsor my bill. So
That's good.
had to go out and buy a sport coat because I lost mine in the move. So
We should also mention that Dave Hemingway gave some really good testimony that he wrote in advance on the storage bill, and I think that really helped solidify the support for that bill as well.
yeah.
Yep. So
Yeah, the personal engagement, I think, turns out to be really essential for
Yeah.
these things.
It's the power of the coalition and the teamwork
Yes.
we bring together. So
That's
thank
right.
you, Bruce, and thank you, Deana and Cliff, for all of your great commentary today on the progress that's being made. I think this is really critical for our members to hear. So really appreciate your time and effort in these sessions, and to you as well, Dave, for your participation in the storage bill. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and we'll keep you all updated on further developments. And then just a couple of dates to keep in mind. April 17th, it's a Friday. That office hours will be our legislative halftime report, as we'll be, I think, like a week or two out from the crossover deadline. And we'll be able to report on some other developments and movements on these bills, as well as the I think 25 or so other bills that we are supporting, opposing, or engaging in. And of course, as a reminder, you can track and monitor any of this information. Oops, I closed the tab, but I'm going to send it to you right now, which is on our bill tracker. A little bit slow internet today. All right, so I'm going to put that into the chat right now. And of course, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, you're welcome to reach out to me, to Jackson, to Cliff, Nick, any one of us. Thank you all so much. Hope you have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you all. Really appreciate the participation.